So, what can be legally collected? Um, Legal standards for who can collect property differs from state to state. Um, Medical legal death investigators will generally collect items that are found um, on the body, and then also anything that they feel can aid them in determining the cause and manner of death, or even in finding the next of kin. So, not everything needs to be collected. Say that a decedent is found in their home, you're not going to want to collect every personal effect that you see in their room or their living room. Um, but like I said, you will want to collect things that could possibly help you find the next of kin or determine cause and manner of death. In the case of a dispute over next of kin, the medical legal death investigator should collect that item themselves and then hold on and secure that item until the appropriate party is determined. So, release of property. Uh, this will usually include a standard form that's signed by the individual obtaining the property. And oftentimes they will ask for the government issued ID so that they can take down the information on that ID. Um, some jurisdictions will release property to the mortuary that is handling the funeral arrangements. And in this case, that a separate party, meaning not a family member, is collecting the property. This is a good time to get the information off a government issued ID. And then legal next of kin should indicate on the above form that they give permission to pick up the personal effects as well. All right, now we'll be moving on to evidence. So, a term that you'll hear frequently in this section that is really important for collecting evidence is maintaining the chain of custody. This means that there is proper documentation showing who has collected, sealed, examined, and released an item. And it's important that each person who comes into contact with an item signs and records the date and time before sealing the item. So when preparing an item for packing, it's important to note that each item must be packed separately. In the case that you find two socks right next to each other, you may think it's common sense to put these in the same bag. But when we follow procedure, you'll see that they need to be placed into two separate bags, and both of them need to be labeled where they came from exactly. In the case that you collect some evidence that is wet, those items will be collected and documented and secured. And then once safely back in the office, investigators will a lot of the times have a drying rack that they can lay these items out on so that they can dry out before placing them into storage. And the reason why this is important is because leaving wet items in a bag, especially plastic, could cause them to grow mold and then in turn damage the evidence that you could use to further the case. Now we'll talk about prescription medications. They're really important. They provide a window into what went on a lot of the time. And differing from how we just talked about the socks, usually prescription medications can be placed into a single bag to be processed later. A medical legal death investigator is mainly concerned about what medications are found, if a decedent was taking them as prescribed, so that later when the toxicology report comes back, they'll be able to compare the substances to the medication log. Medications that indicate chronic health conditions can show that an autopsy may not be necessary. And in contrast, sleeping aids or narcotic pain medications can show that an autopsy is indeed necessary because they'd like to determine whether or not these medications played a role in the death. Most offices, when a scene investigation is needed, they will inventory or retain medications. Um, So information found on bottles can be an extremely useful tool for medical legal death investigators. Um, First of all, because if a decedent is found by someone non-related, um, that person may not be able to identify them and especially may not be able to identify their next of kin. So what we can do is use medication bottles to find out the physician, call them, and then ask if the decedent filled out an emergency contact form. They can send us that contact form, and then we can use that to determine who we should call. If filled out by a physician who only provides emergency services, this may indicate that the decedent's death was deteriorating. Medication bottles that contain fewer pills remaining than expected from the date filled, and the number of pills filled, and then the dosage, these all can indicate that either the decedent took more than prescribed. This would usually be in the case of narcotics or sleep aids because of their how likely they are to be abused. And then if the decedent took less than prescribed, this could speak to their overall health. If we find diabetics or cardiac meds, this could indicate that their condition was getting worse. And if they weren't taking them, that could even lead to their death. Regardless of their usefulness, collected medications information must be fully documented and bottles must be counted before stored in a secure location. There are protocols for destroying medications, and these are going to be determined by industry standards. They do this to avoid negative effects to the environment. And then also, if you just throw one away in the trash, you never know who could find it. And of course, we don't want that to happen. And then at the end, before destroying medications, an individual separate from the case should count the medications and compare the number that they found to what was previously documented to ensure no inappropriate action has been taken. Like we talked about, sleeping aids and narcotic medications have a high likelihood to be abused, and unfortunately, abuse of narcotics can also be present with professionals in the system. And so we just want to make sure that there's no foul play or inappropriate action being taken by the professionals in the office.